The streets are on fire, soldiers are retreating, and Venezuelans are openly declaring war on Maduro. But the most chilling moment isn't what you see on the streets. It's a leaked clip that suggests that Venezuela's uprising could ignite a civil war far beyond its borders. Let's get started. The spark that set Venezuela on fire. The video you're about to see is not just another protest clip. It is the kind of footage authoritarian governments spend millions trying to erase, the kind of viral evidence that can topple regimes. What we see online shows Venezuelans in the streets, not just chanting, not just waving flags, but openly revolting against Nicolas Maduro.
If toppled statues of his mentor, the late Hugo Chavez, is how you measured political demise in Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro would be worried.
These are no longer peaceful marches. These are barricades, firebombs, and chants of war. And the question that everyone is whispering today is chilling. Has Venezuela's civil war just begun? The images flooding social media are raw, unpolished, and unfiltered. Citizens storming government buildings, tear gas choking city squares, armored vehicles retreating under a hail of rocks. And while Maduro's state television desperately insists this is just isolated unrest, the truth is spreading too quickly to suppress. One clip in particular, already watched millions of times worldwide, captures the exact moment protesters declare they are done with dictatorship. Before we unpack what this all means, we need to rewind, because to truly understand why this viral footage matters, you need to know the desperation boiling beneath the surface in Venezuela for years. For more than a decade, Venezuelans have lived under the crushing weight of economic collapse, hyperinflation, and shortages of food and medicine. Families survive on less than $3 a month. Hospitals run out of antibiotics. Entire neighborhoods plunge into darkness as the power grid collapses. 7 million people have fled across borders into Colombia, Brazil, Peru, and beyond, creating one of the largest refugee crises in the world. And through it all, while his citizens starved, Maduro clung to power, propped up by military elites and foreign backers. So when the world sees Venezuelans taking to the streets now, they're not just watching another protest, they're watching the breaking point of a nation. And this is why the footage has gone so viral. For the first time in years, the people look less like victims and more like a resistance movement determined to end Maduro's reign. And the clips we're about to show you prove it.
No pedimos más nada. Tengo a toda mi familia afuera. Y ya me toca irme a mí también, pero no quiero.
It's a declaration of intent, freedom or nothing. Hear the tone. This isn't a crowd asking politely. It's a crowd declaring that their struggle ends only with victory or with death. This escalation didn't happen overnight. In recent months, frustration boiled over. First in protests over unpaid teacher salaries, then in mass gatherings demanding free elections. Each spark lit another fire. The government responded the way it always does. Brute force, tear gas, arrests, intimidation. But this time something cracked. The people refused to retreat. They pushed back. And the moment that video hit social media, it spread like wildfire. International media, exiled opposition leaders, and even Venezuelan students abroad shared it as a rallying cry, because the symbolism was undeniable. This wasn't just a protest anymore. It was the opening act of a civil war. Of course, Maduro denies all of this. He blames foreign agents, even going as far as pointing accusing fingers at the United States.
La oposición contra el país, la derecha extremista, sin lugar a dudas, ellos son los autores intelectuales y materiales de este ataque y han utilizado tecnología de alto nivel que solo tiene el gobierno de Estados Unidos en el mundo.
But the cracks are visible. Reports already suggest soldiers are refusing to fire on civilians. And history tells us, when loyalty and the military fractures, that's when regimes collapse. Now, why does this matter for you watching at home? Because Venezuela's crisis is not just a local tragedy, it's a geopolitical earthquake. The country holds the largest proven oil reserves on Earth. Its alliances with Russia, Iran, and China make it a strategic pawn in the global chessboard. If civil war erupts, it won't stay in Caracas. It will ripple through global energy markets, destabilize neighbors like Colombia and Brazil, and reshape U.S. foreign policy overnight. But behind the fiery images of crowds, something darker lurks, because the regime is preparing its own response. Leaked videos show what Maduro's secret police are willing to unleash. Brutal crackdowns designed not just to disperse protests, but to erase dissent entirely. Here's where the story takes its sharpest turn. The footage flooding social media isn't just shocking because of its brutality. It's shocking because of the actions of the soldiers themselves. civilians. For the first time, they sound afraid. When troops retreat from unarmed citizens, the regime isn't in control, it's in crisis. This is what Maduro does not want you to see. On state television, the narrative is calm, smiling parades, peaceful streets, and orchestrated shows of support. But reality is leaking through cell phones, and no matter how many times censors try to scrub it, the videos are moving too quickly to be contained. So the regime does what regimes always do when exposed. It tightens the screws. Within hours of the clips going viral, FAS squads, Venezuela's most feared police unit, were deployed across Caracas. Nicknamed the Death Squad in uniform, FAS has been documented by Human Rights Watch as carrying out thousands of extrajudicial killings. Their method is chilling: arrive at midnight, smash down doors, drag young men away, then later claim they died in clashes. Families know the truth. Their sons were executed, and now FAS is hunting in opposition neighborhoods, going house to house. Parents whisper about hiding their teenage boys under beds. Mothers clutch children as boots stomp past their windows. This is not rumor. It is a pattern that's been documented for years, and now it's happening again, caught on tape. Yet, even under this terror, the crowds grow. Why? Because hunger outweighs fear. Families who have already buried loved ones lost to medicine shortages feel they have nothing left to lose. One woman, filmed as she protested, put it bluntly,
Porque estamos cansados. Tengo 23 años viviendo el mismo gobierno y ha sido siempre lo mismo. Mierda con más mierda para seguirse revolviendo la mierda, ¿no? Ya basta. Yo quiero un futuro para mi hija. Yo no he podido estudiar.
That sentence encapsulates this uprising. This is not negotiation, it is revolt. And behind closed doors, the regime knows it's wobbling. Leaked audio analyzed by Infobee suggests entire battalions are refusing orders to deploy against civilians. Without military loyalty, Maduro's power disintegrates. That's why opposition leaders in exile are calling this the final phase. But this isn't just about Venezuela anymore. With over 7 million Venezuelans already displaced, entire towns in Colombia and Peru are majority Venezuelan. If civil war erupts, the refugee crisis could easily surpass 10 million, overwhelming the region. And oil, the ultimate prize, means that foreign powers are circling. Russia and China back Maduro's survival. The US sharpens its sanctions. If fighting escalates, Venezuela could become the next battleground for proxy war. Maduro senses this. That's why he frames the protests as a US-backed coup attempt. But Venezuelans themselves reject that narrative. Ask any mother standing in a food line and she'll tell you the truth. The hunger is not imported. It was manufactured by corruption and theft. So where does this leave Venezuela? At the edge of history. This uprising could topple Maduro. It could descend into civil war. It could trigger foreign intervention. But one truth is already undeniable. The illusion of Maduro's invincibility has been shattered. And once an illusion shatters, it can never be restored. In the next part of this expose, you will see even more leaked orders, intercepted communications, and testimonies from inside Venezuela that paint a picture of a regime crumbling faster than anyone imagined. But pause for a moment. The chants you've just heard, the images you've just seen are not just viral content. They are history unfolding in real time. When we look back a decade from now, we may remember this week as the spark that ended Maduro's dictatorship, or as the moment hope was once again drowned in blood. Either way, what you are witnessing is a turning point, so keep watching, because what comes next is even more shocking than what you've seen so far. The crackdown the regime couldn't hide. The footage you're about to see is not meant for television. And why did it spread like wildfire? Because it confirmed what Venezuelans have whispered for years, but rarely been able to prove. Their government is waging a secret war against its own citizens.
Le puedo decir al pueblo de Venezuela que si han hecho daño, estamos actuando.
And make no mistake, this is exactly what Maduro's government does not want the world to see. On state TV, the images are carefully choreographed. Wide boulevards, calm music, lines of supporters waving red flags, even staged parades to show normal life. But the reality leaking onto phones and laptops is utterly different. It's fire in the streets, it's police retreating, it's neighborhoods in revolt. And here's the problem for Maduro. No matter how many times his censors delete or suppress, the clips move faster than they can chase. The dictatorship is losing the one battle it cannot afford to lose, the information war. So what does the regime do when the mask slips? It cracks down harder. Within hours of these videos going viral, FAS squads, the feared special action forces, rolled into Caracas with black uniforms, heavy rifles, and armored trucks. To Venezuelans, FAS is not just another police unit. It is a symbol of terror, described by human rights groups as nothing less than a death squad in uniform. Their pattern is chilling. Arrive at midnight, kick down doors, drag young men away, and leave families families wondering if they'll ever see them again. Reports flooded in from opposition neighborhoods, parents hiding their teenage sons under beds, locking them in closets, or smuggling them out through back alleys, praying the boots and gunfire would pass by their doors. Mothers described clutching their children as flashlights swept across their windows. This isn't rumor. This has been documented for years by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and countless local NGOs. But now, for the first time, it's being caught on tape, in real time, and broadcast beyond Venezuela's borders. And yet, despite this terror, the crowds keep coming. Why? Because hunger has become a stronger motivator than fear. Families who have buried loved ones due to medicine shortages are no longer afraid of dying at the hands of police. They feel they have already lost everything. One young man, speaking through a mask, put it in words that will echo in history books.
Personally, I don't mind giving up my life out there in the streets, if it is for a good cause.
That single sentence captures why these protests are different. This is not a bargaining movement. This is not about pleading for reforms or asking for cheaper food. It is a revolt, plain and simple. And here's where the danger escalates. Behind closed doors, Maduro's own inner circle is fracturing. According to leaked audio analyzed by Infobay, top officials are panicked about defections inside the armed forces. In one clip, a colonel warns that entire battalions are refusing to deploy against civilians. If true, this is unprecedented. Remember, Maduro's survival depends on military loyalty. If the rank and file start breaking away, the regime crumbles, no matter how many weapons it holds. The opposition senses this weakness. Leaders in exile are branding this moment the final phase. Juan Guaido, marginalized internationally but still a symbolic figure, tweeted that the footage represents a nation rising. In Bogota, exiled Venezuelan students staged rallies with signs that read, "Caracas, resist. We are with you." Even those who fled years ago are finding ways to amplify the movement. The diaspora, scattered across the Americas, is proving that you can leave the country, but you can't leave the fight. And that's why this isn't just Venezuela's problem anymore. This crisis has already spilled far beyond its borders. More than 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country, the second largest displacement crisis in the world after Syria. In cities like Cucuta, Colombia, and Tumbes, Peru, Venezuelan migrants now outnumber locals in entire districts. Street corners are filled with vendors, selling arepas, remittances keep families alive, and local schools teach Spanish with a Venezuelan accent. If a civil war erupts, those numbers could skyrocket into the tens of millions, destabilizing entire nations in the region. And then, of course, there is oil. Venezuela sits atop the largest proven reserves on Earth. Even in its collapsed state, its oil industry remains a strategic prize. That's why Russia and China have pumped billions into Maduro's survival, while the US has tightened sanctions around his regime. If protests metastasize into war, this won't remain a domestic conflict. It will become a geopolitical showdown, with great powers maneuvering for control. History gives us plenty of warning signs. In Libya, a rebellion against Gaddafi morphed into a NATO-backed war within months. In Syria, peaceful protests spiraled into a decade-long bloodbath because foreign powers armed both sides. Venezuela is not identical to either case, but the ingredients are eerily similar. A hated dictator, a starving population, global oil interests, and viral footage forcing the world to pay attention. Maduro knows this. That's why his propaganda machine is already spinning. On state TV, anchors insist the protests are a US-backed coup attempt.
Se movía por el mundo para instalar este escenario en Venezuela.
He needs to delegitimize the anger, to cast his citizens not as hungry, desperate families, but as pawns of foreign powers. But here's the reality. Ask any Venezuelan mother standing in line for hours with an empty pot, and she'll tell you the truth. The hunger is not imported. It is homegrown, the product of corruption, theft, and mismanagement at the highest levels. So what happens next? Analysts describe this moment as the point of no return. The regime has shown its teeth, the raids, the arrests, the threats, but the people haven't backed down. If anything, the crowds are swelling, and once both sides decide escalation is their only option, stepping back becomes nearly impossible, which leads us to the single most chilling clip of leaked footage so far. A shaky phone camera aimed at a street, gunfire in the background, heavy boots echoing on pavement, and then a voice shouting, "Shoot them all, it doesn't matter who it is." That is not a command for crowd control. That is an order for extermination. And the fact that it came from a government officer, recorded, documented, undeniable, should chill you to the bone. Because when a state is willing to give orders like that, it is no longer governing. It is waging war against its own people. And yet the footage doesn't end there. Even after that order, the crowd doesn't scatter. They charge forward with sticks, rocks, pots, and pans, facing rifles with fury, meeting bullets with nothing but desperation. That is the image now flooding the world's timelines. That is why these clips are not being forgotten, not being buried by censors, because they capture something larger than Venezuela. They capture the universal moment when fear turns into defiance, when hunger turns into rage, when silence turns into resistance. And that's where we stand now. In the final part of this expose, we will follow this revolt to its possible outcomes. Could Maduro finally fall? Could Venezuela plunge into full-scale civil war? And could the international community, after years of condemning and sanctioning, finally be forced to act? Stay with us, because the revelations that follow may be the most shocking yet. The point of no return. If you've made it this far, you already know this is not just another story about protests in Venezuela. This is a nation standing at the edge of history, one step away from freedom, or one misstep away from all-out war. And the latest reports coming out of Caracas suggest that this final act could play out in weeks, not years. For more than 2 decades, Venezuelans have been promised stability, prosperity, and security under the so-called Bolivarian Revolution. What they received instead was collapse, the highest inflation rate in the world, hospitals without syringes, supermarkets without rice or flour, and families so desperate they fled across borders by the millions. Now, after years of failed uprisings, the fragile line that held this nation together is snapping. The question is no longer whether change is coming, it's how bloody that change will be. Let's start with the most explosive possibility. Maduro falls. For the first time since he inherited power after Hugo Chávez's death, cracks inside Maduro's government are no longer whispers in exile cafes or anonymous tweets from defectors. They are visible, audible, and undeniable. Intelligence leaks point to governors, generals, and even ministers quietly reaching out to opposition figures, hedging their bets in case the palace walls crumble. Think about that. The very men who built their wealth off Maduro's dictatorship, who controlled food imports, smuggling routes, and oil contracts, are now rehearsing their survival plan for a post-Maduro Venezuela. That's how dictatorships end. Not always with a bullet or a mob at the gates, but with betrayal from within. Ceausescu in Romania, Mubarak in Egypt, Ben Ali in Tunisia. They all discovered too late that loyalty in an authoritarian state is paper-thin. It lasts exactly as long as the money and fear flow. When either dries up, the loyalists scatter, and on the streets, that shift is mirrored in the symbols ordinary Venezuelans are choosing. More and more footage shows people tearing down government posters, burning effigies of Maduro, waving the pre-Chávez Venezuelan tricolor. These are not random acts of vandalism. They are declarations, recorded on phones and broadcast to the world. You no longer rule us.
President Maduro says you're terrorists.
Yes, I'm a terrorist. If defending people's rights means being a terrorist, he tells me. If it means defending them to the death.
But here's the danger. History shows dictators rarely go quietly. They don't fade away with a press conference and a flight to exile. They cling to power with claws and teeth, even when everyone around them knows it's over. And Maduro has already signaled that he is willing to unleash scorched earth tactics. The leaked order we mentioned earlier, shoot them all, is not just rhetoric. It is a window into the regime's mindset. Survival at any cost, no matter how many lives it destroys. Human rights groups warn that Venezuela could be days away from a massacre on a national scale if this standoff continues. And if that happens, the dream of a peaceful transition evaporates overnight. Which brings us to the second scenario. Venezuela descends into civil war. Now, I know how that sounds. Civil war is a phrase most of us reserve for textbooks or foreign headlines. To apply it to Venezuela may feel like an exaggeration, but 5 years ago, the same was said about Syria. Civil wars don't arrive with formal declarations. They creep in through a series of clashes, raids, and retaliations until suddenly the nation realizes it is no longer living in protest, but in war, and the signs are already here. Opposition activists circulate calls to form resistance brigades. WhatsApp groups share instructions for building barricades and Molotov cocktails. Videos show young men welding sheet metal into makeshift shields. At night, neighborhoods bang pots and pans in defiance, a sound that echoes like war drums. That is not political rhetoric. That is the language of war. And once those words leave the mouths of ordinary citizens, it becomes almost impossible to return to negotiation tables. If Venezuela collapses into civil war, the humanitarian cost will be catastrophic. 7 million Venezuelans have already fled the country, one of the largest exoduses in modern history. That number could swell to 10 or even 12 million. Imagine an entire nation's population emptying across borders, overwhelming Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, Peru. Towns already struggling with scarce resources would buckle under the weight. Schools, hospitals, and housing systems across Latin America would face collapse. And then there's oil. Venezuela's reserves are the largest in the world. Even in dysfunction, its oil matters. If war erupts, pipelines pipelines will be sabotaged, production halted, and shipping disrupted. The global market will feel the quake immediately. Gasoline prices would spike. Energy-dependent countries would scramble for alternatives. The ripple effects would travel from Caracas to Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and beyond. Which brings us to the third scenario, foreign intervention. So far, the international community has done little beyond sanctions and statements of concern, but viral footage changes the calculus. Every burning barricade, every chant of civil war, every leaked clip of soldiers retreating adds pressure on foreign governments to act. The United States has long labeled Maduro a dictator and a narco-trafficker, even placing bounties on his head. Russia and China, on the other hand, have billions of dollars invested in keeping him alive, both politically and literally. If either side escalates, militarily, financially, or through covert operations, Venezuela could become the next proxy battlefield in the ongoing Cold War of the 21st century. The terrifying part? We've seen this play before. In Libya, Western intervention toppled Gaddafi but left chaos. In Syria, foreign backing turned a local uprising into a decade-long bloodbath. In Ukraine, international involvement turned resistance into a global flashpoint. Venezuela is not Syria or Libya, but the ingredients are strikingly similar. A hated dictator, a suffering people, foreign interests circling like vultures, and viral footage that refuses to be ignored. But let's pause here, because beyond the geopolitics, beyond the oil, beyond the maps and strategies, this story is about people. Flesh and blood Venezuelans who wake up every day and decide whether to march, to hide, or to flee. This is not about ideology. It's not even primarily about Maduro versus the opposition. It's about dignity. Do Venezuelans get to live free, or do they remain prisoners of a regime that treats hunger as control and dissent as treason? And that's why this footage resonates far beyond Venezuela's borders. Even if you've never set foot in Caracas, you recognize that cry for freedom. You recognize the courage of facing down tanks with nothing but a flag. You recognize the universal human desire to breathe free air. So where does this leave us? We are at a crossroads with three brutal outcomes. If Maduro holds on, Venezuela risks calcifying into a tropical North Korea, a collapsed state run by paranoia, cut off from the world, where silence and starvation become normal. If the opposition wins, the road will be long, scarred by years of corruption and trauma, but at least it will be a road back to democracy. If civil war erupts, however, Venezuela risks being consumed entirely, its cities reduced to rubble, its families scattered across continents. For Venezuelans, this is not theoretical. It is not a think tank scenario or an academic paper. It is happening in real time. In Caracas, Maracaibo, Valencia, every chant, every barricade, every viral video is a step toward one of those futures. And here's the final haunting thought. In revolutions, there is always a point of no return. Once a people declares freedom or nothing, there is no going back. That moment has already arrived in Venezuela. So watch closely, share the footage, spread the word, because history is being written not in marble halls or parliamentary chambers, but in the smoke-filled streets of Caracas. And whether it ends in liberation or in tragedy will depend not just on what happens inside the country, but on whether the world chooses to keep its eyes open. Because for Venezuelans right now, the message is chillingly clear. They are done with Maduro's dictatorship, and with those words, Venezuela's uprising enters its most dangerous, most decisive chapter yet. And with that, we've come to the end of this deep dive. For more juicy content like this, smash that subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications, and check out the cards showing on your screen for more videos. Don't forget to comment your thoughts below.